EU and India are in the final lap of concluding a free trade agreement and an investment agreement. Once concluded, that will be the biggest economically significant agreement in the world. The European Union is not comfortable with the extent to which trade is being weaponized for political purposes. I think Trump is scared of China. I'm quite confident that we're going to see around the end of this year a fairly comprehensive free trade agreement between Europe and India.
Hello and a very warm welcome. You're watching Hindustan Times and my name is Aayesha Varma. The European Union is intensifying pressure on Moscow, responding to increased drone and missile attacks, recent alleged Russian violations of Polish and Romanian airspace, and pressure from allies, including US President Trump, to halt all Russian energy imports. Now, these measures reflect a shift towards cutting off all possible sources of revenue for the Kremlin as the war continues into its fourth year. Joining us at this moment is Mr. John Clarke, a former EU trade negotiator and the former director for international affairs at the European Commission. Mr. Clarke, thank you so much for speaking with us.
My pleasure, Aayesha. Good afternoon.
Sir, the European Union has outrightly rejected US President's suggestion that they impose tariffs on India and China for the purchase of Russian oil. Could you explain why this decision was made, particularly when it comes to the relationship that the EU shares with America, India, and China?
I think there are two reasons for the EU's decision to reject Trump's pressure to put slap high tariffs on India. First of all, as you know, the EU and India are in the final lap of concluding a free trade agreement and an investment agreement. Once concluded, that will be the biggest economically significant agreement in the world. And so it would be completely counterintuitive at this point in time when the two sides are on the cusp of a groundbreaking trade agreement, which will really bring the economies together. It would be totally counterintuitive to slap a 50% or 100% tariff on India for the fact that it continues to buy some Russian crude oil and refines it and sends it to other countries. So that's the first reason. Secondly, I think the European Union is not comfortable with the extent to which trade is being weaponized for political purposes.
Okay.
We've seen increasingly the Trump administration using tariffs, using trade sanctions to achieve completely unrelated political objectives. Yeah, and that's a very, very dangerous road to go down. It's unavoidable in part, but it's a very, very dangerous precedent. And I think the EU shies away from that as a matter of principle.
Absolutely. Out of curiosity, what's your take on why the United States is imposing direct tariffs on only India and not China in this regard?
I think Trump is scared of China. And we saw when he introduced his Liberation Day tariffs, China imposing on China 100% tariff, or maybe more, I've forgotten now. China retaliated immediately, and Trump backed down. So I think the only language that the U.S. administration understands is power, and for that reason, China retaliating, that would hurt the USA. China has a very, very high pain threshold; they can suffer that. So he backed down, and that's why he's not pushing China in this area, even though China imports more oil from Russia than India does. I must say I'm very pleased to see the strength of will of Mr. Modi and the Indian government so far in resisting what is a very difficult pressure from the US.
Absolutely. You know, the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has said, and I quote, "The EU will make its own decisions." What geopolitical factors usually influence EU trade policy with other nations?
Well, as I said, traditionally the European Commission likes to keep trade away from geopolitical tensions and pressures.
Okay.
That is less and less possible these days, unfortunately, especially given the current Trump administration and given the
Absolutely.
difficulties that the EU has with in many aspects of its relations with China. So the EU is really trying to steer between, if you like, Scylla and Charybdis, between a unpredictable USA and a prickly China, which is, however, on the rise. Yeah? So it would make no sense for the EU to choose to put all its eggs in one basket, because it would lead to a trade war with either the USA or with China, and nobody wants that.
All right. Now, another statement that Ms. von der Leyen also made was, and this is another quote, closer cooperation between the EU and India is more essential than ever. How evolved or dependent is trade between Europe and India at this point? Is it possible that we could see tariffs being imposed in the future?
No, as I said, we are about to conclude a free trade agreement which will liberalize almost all trade and will also free up investment in both directions. So we're not going to see a raising of the barriers. We're going to see a lowering of the barriers. Now, up to now, EU-India trade has been suboptimal. The Indian market is fairly heavily protected. It has, however, doubled in the last 10 years, because India's its economy has prospered greatly in the last decade, with 7%, 8% growth every year, but there's a lot more that can be done. So I'm quite confident that we're going to see around the end of this year a fairly comprehensive free trade agreement between Europe and India, which will strengthen the trade relationship even further and allow both of us to avoid excessive dependency on the USA or China. We have to diversify. We have to spread the risk, and we are
Absolutely.
fairly like-minded regions with a lot of common interests and values. And I think this is a fantastic opportunity, frankly.
Something to look forward to as well. In general, and in your experience as well, how much does US trade policy influence or dictate EU trade policy?
Well, it obviously has some impact, but less and less as the USA shows itself to be completely unreliable, completely unpredictable, a maverick, almost a pariah on the international trade stage, and at the same time as the US's position in global trade declines, relatively speaking. The USA now is about 12% of international trade and getting less all the time. China is far more. Europe is the world's biggest trading bloc. So I think looking at it in a sort of longer term sort of secular trend, the EU is becoming less and less dependent or influenced by US trade policy. And Trump is actually accelerating that delinking, if you like.
Exactly, which leads me to my next question. Would you agree with the statement that Trump seems to be trying to withdraw from what's going on because he's putting more pressure on NATO to shoulder costs when it comes to financial aid to Ukraine during the war? And he's also putting pressure on the EU when it comes to sanctions, as we're also seeing.
Yes, I think so. I think one, Trump has a very, very short attention span, and all he really cares about is the tweets or the headlines of the morning, and then he moves on to something else in the afternoon and the next day, and that really drives a lot of his erratic decision making. And secondly, he has understood that, contrary to what he promised when he was elected, he would not stop the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 24 hours. The world is far
Exactly.
more complicated than that, and so he's basically, I think, not given up, but he is withdrawing some of his commitment and leadership faced with that reality.
So, do you think that focusing on Russia's oil exports is the right way to go about sanctions to end the war?
It certainly will help because oil and gas are the mainstay of the Russian economy. Someone once said to me, and I'm not sure if this should be repeated on your program. Russia's main exports are oil and prostitutes. Yeah, and certainly the biggest export is oil, and Russia's war effort depends on earning foreign income through its oil and gas exports. So the more that the tap can be turned off in Russia, the sooner this tragic war will end.
So then, speaking of exports as well, we're now the world is watching the Russia-Ukraine war in its fourth year. At this point, how reliant is the European Union on imports from Russia?
Less and less. The EU still imports about 18% of its natural gas from Russia, and then some oil, refined oil, which has come via India or other parts of the world. But the EU's dependence on Russia is decreasing. It's not completely broken free of Russian imports, and there are 3 or 4 member states who are still quite dependent on Russian oil or gas. But even irrespective of the war, the EU's policy of a green transition to move to clean energy and away from fossil fuels in itself means, in the medium to long term, an end to imports of Russian oil and gas. So the war has accelerated that green transition, and the sanctions, I think, are perfectly logical in a war situation.
All right. Now, speaking of some of the sanctions, some of the key components of Europe's 19th package of sanctions on Russia are, one, a complete ban on imports of Russian liquefied natural gas. This is by January 2027, which is accelerated from the previous 2028 goal. There's also a full transaction ban on more Russian banks, including their subsidiaries and financial operations in third countries. How will these decisions impact Europe's economy, and who will Europe rely on for LNG January 2027 onwards?
It will have a minor negative impact on the European economy, because it will push up slightly the price of energy, which is already very high in Europe, and it is a brake on European competitiveness. That's the first remark I would make. Secondly, the EU will import more LNG from the United States. In the Turnberry Agreement between Europe and the USA, concluded a few weeks ago in Scotland, the EU made a commitment, not a binding one, but an expectation that it will import over the next 3 years $750 billion of US energy. Yeah? So it will wean itself off the residual Russian imports through that means, and also through homegrown green energy, hydrogen, wind power, water, etc. I mean, Europe is really gearing up to be more energy independent and consuming far fewer fossil fuels. So the two things together, I think, will help.
All right, Mr. Clarke, thank you so much for joining us and providing us with all of that crucial insight.
My pleasure. It was a pleasure to join you. Thanks to you.